This is a live mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Second mic check. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
We're on the air.
Good evening. This evening, this is the Kennebunkport Zoning Board of Appeals. It's Tuesday, September 24th. And we're opening the meeting this evening. The first item that I'm going to tend to is taking attendance. So Kevin McDonald,
Here.
Wayne Fessenden,
Here.
Karen Schlegel,
Here.
April Defoe,
Here.
and I'm Paul Cadigan. I'm here, and absent this evening are Jim Fitzgerald and Gordon Ann. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of September 16th. Everybody had a chance to review them in advance?
Did.
Wayne, myself, April, Kevin, and Karen can all, and will all vote on the minutes. Does anybody have any suggested edits or required edits on either of these pages?
None.
None? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion, we accept the minutes as written, September 16th minutes.
Second.
Motion is made and seconded. All in favor of accepting the minutes as written, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Before we get to the next item on the agenda, which is the Slager matter, I'm going to discuss my familiarity with the matter. I met Mr. Slager at a time a while ago. He contacted my office with regard to the matter, which is essentially the subject matter of this appeal. We spoke on the phone once or twice. We met in my office once or twice. I never really got engaged to carry it forward. I didn't have the time on my schedule at the time, but we entered into some discussions that I would equate to being some of the substance of what is before this board this evening. So I'm not going to put it to a vote whether or not I have a conflict of interest, and instead I am going to recuse myself because of my prior contacts with the appellant and discussions that I had with the appellant with regard to the matter before this board. So I'm going to recuse myself at this time and turn the meeting over to the Vice Chair, Wayne Fessenden.
So we have, as Paul stated, we have before us Mr. Randy Slager. The applicant is appealing the issuance of a building permit for 200 Ocean Avenue, tax map 7, block 12, lot 5, in the Cape Arundel zone. And at this time, I'd like a motion to go into executive session per Title I MRS 4056E for consultation with the board's attorney regarding the legal rights and duties of the board.
Okay, so I make a motion to go into executive session for Title I MRS 4056E, consult per Title I MRS 4056E for consultation with the board's attorney regarding the legal rights and duties of the board in this matter.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Point of order, do I mute the mics at this point, or is this broadcast? Typically, executive sessions are not broadcast.
We're moving
We're
back.
stepping,
Okay.
We're moving out back. Thank you, Dave. Okay. I'll
we
explain.
take a little recess. We take a little recess.
Shouldn't be very long, folks.
We
Mics are back on.
Okay. All right, we have returned from executive session, at which time with discussions, there were no decisions made. Before we begin, one of the reasons why we have the table set up is to make it easier for the parties to not have to get up and down and up and down and up and down. So, how about if we have Bell here and Slager here? I introduce it to you, or you just state it? Just state it? Yep. So if I start with, I need my sheet, I need the sheet to work. All right.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to start with a procedural issue and a disclosure on my part. My name is Amy Chow, and I'm the town attorney. Tonight, I'm sitting in my capacity representing the Board of Appeals. I did want to disclose to everyone that I did initially have a couple of communications with Warner Gilliam, who made me aware of the appeal and some issues related to the permit. And we discussed some procedural matters, but I gave no substantive advice to Mr. Gilliam because I determined pretty early on that because of the legal issues involved that I probably would be better suited to be assisting the Board of Appeals. So I wanted to make that disclosure and entertain if there are any or just ask if there are any objections from the parties to my role here tonight.
Nope, seeing none, hearing none. Thank you. A couple things to read off first. We will do another quorum call and start with Kevin.
Here.
State your name,
Oh,
please. I know-
Kevin McDonald.
Wayne Fessenden.
Karen Schlegel.
And so, so that everyone understands, and the bylaws for those of, I know you people do, but for those people who don't, the bylaws for this particular board, the decisions on any matter before the board shall require affirmative vote of the majority of the entire membership of the board. Our board consists of 7 members. Thus, 4 votes would be required, and a tie or favorable vote by a lesser number than the required majority will be considered a rejection of the application under the consideration. So, you'll need 4. So we have to begin with, and by our bylaws and others, is to begin with for the board to either discuss or to have a decision on, is this the appropriate jurisdiction for this appeal? Are we the appropriate board?
Do we comment? Well, an appeal process does come to the board, but now we do have to talk about whether it came to us in a timely manner.
So if it would be helpful to the board, can I orient you to Section 9.3A of the ordinance? The appeals procedure reads, any person aggrieved by a decision of the code enforcement officer other than a decision or failure to act related to an enforcement-related matter, as described in Article 9.2A1 of this ordinance, may appeal that decision by filing an administrative appeal application on forms provided for that purpose with the town clerk within 30 days of the decision. The board, upon showing of good cause, may waive the 30-day requirement. And I do believe the parties have indicated in letters that that is an issue that needs to be addressed. I do think it is a sort of a threshold question for the board as to whether or not the board will choose to waive the 30-day requirement for the appeal. And we probably should put in the record when the appeal was filed, when and when the action being appealed was taken. For the record.
I can do that. Mrs. Slager filed the appeal, accepted in the town office on August 1st, 2019. Building permit under question,
It's like December 4th
was December
of
4th.
18.
The town received the application on November 19th of 2018.
So I think unless the board has questions or comments, that it would be appropriate to hear from the parties on this issue, on this particular issue under 9.3A. Do you wish to begin?
Agreed.
Do you wish to begin with the appellant?
We could, and just the clarification of the other bylaws
Oh,
as I go
sorry.
through.
Yes.
Yep. There appears to be no conflict of interest on the remaining members, unless others have. The application appears to be complete. All parties have agreed to the extension past the 35 days, which is in the bylaws to hear this particular case. And the 7-day submission of documents, it appears that September 12th was the last document submitted to this board. So we're well within there. Which brings us back to jurisdiction. So if the board would like to proceed, then per our bylaws, then the applicant, Mr. Slager, would begin. And we would begin hopefully with a timeliness discussion. So, whomever.
Thank you. Mr. Slager is represented by Allen R. Atkins and Associates. I'm Allen Atkins and Fulton Rice. Before we start, I think Mr. Slager, with your permission, would like to make a short statement to the board to introduce himself. That's
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to be here to begin with. If Ms. Bell had been forthright on what she was doing, we could have avoided this meeting. I want to give you a little bit of background on myself. I served as a captain in the U.S. Army. I proudly joined the
Hold
FBI.
on Just a second. Dave, you okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay.
sure.
Okay. I proudly joined the FBI. I left the Bureau to provide services to the federal government as an outside consultant. In 1996, I started my own company and sold it in July 2012. In November 2012, we purchased our favorite house here in Kennebunk area at 196 Ocean Avenue and transformed the garden areas. 2 weeks after 9/11 hit, I needed the first a series of 4 spinal surgeries that were due from strain earlier in my Army career, where I had had 2 previous back operations. I had the last one in 2016, where 14 vertebrae were fused, 2 rods implanted using a robotic system, and a team of surgeons did the surgery. It lasted 11 hours. A year earlier, a morphine pump had been implanted into my side here with a catheter to the spinal cord, putting morphine directly on the spinal cord. I mention that because it has to do with some of my medical issues. Since buying our home, we simply love it. We love the town. We love being here and being part of it. We look forward to returning from Miami Beach each spring to be up here. So it's our favorite place. Except for this spring, we're medical needs until June 7th, and a family member's serious cancer and her subsequent death delayed us till June 9th. I woke seriously ill that morning. The aircraft got in about 2 in the morning. I woke up that morning seriously ill. Last thing I remember is walking over and getting into the EMS truck. I was transported to Maine Medical Center by ambulance. They did research on my condition at the time. They said it was meningitis was the diagnosis. They moved me to New Hampshire Regional Portsmouth Hospital, where I was moved into intensive care. The only thing I really remember there, other needing meals, was them pumping me full of antibiotics, huge amounts, at 5 IVs. So I was completely filled with antibiotics while they tried to figure out what was affecting my system. That lasted several days in ICU. The Friday before, I'd been given a drug because of the morphine pump. My surgeon wanted to bring the level of morphine down. He felt it was too high. And they used Prealt, which is a medication that's derived from sea snails, the venom they use to paralyze their victims before they eat them. And what it does, it breaks down the calcium cell in the nerves so it doesn't transmit any pain. So for 2 days, I had no pain. And then I ended up going into the hospital in intensive care. They finally decided at the end of that period that I had an allergic reaction to that Prealt, and that's what had caused all the problems. So I was in the hospital for a week, and then my surgeons afterwards said it's going to be 3 to 4 weeks before all the antibiotics get out of your system because you had so many massive pumped in. To take it easy and just don't do much. So I moved at a slow pace. We ended up that we had, and fortunately I recovered from that illness because that was very serious. We may have had a bad year that became worse when we came and found a tall raised patio built on our property line about 6 feet from our house. The patio workers, when my granddaughter, she's 12 years old, was in there working on her iPad, creating cartoons. We had workers staring in at her. Felt very uncomfortable. We've tended to keep our shades closed because it's a perfect height just to look right in the windows. So we lost privacy with that. And I believe they're planning to add glass panels on top of the walls that are already there, and they exceed the height that was in the plan. The patio presents a direct danger to our house foundation because of the way it's constructed, and the foundation has steel beams underneath it that uphold the wood. Let me let you know the house was built in 1896. It's extremely dry wood. It was rebuilt in 2007 by Tim Spang, and it did a good job. But if that wall were to burst on the side, everything would go in under the foundation and could very easily knock those metal pilings down and collapse that portion of the house. So I'm very concerned about that danger. Also, with winter storms, successive winter storms are going to weaken it. And should that burst, it can also come down onto the roadway onto Ocean Avenue and I believe be a danger for people walking or driving down there. so I'm concerned about that. In the Cape Arundel zone, structures such as this one normally have a 15-foot setback and preserve privacy and reduce potential accidents. Unless there's a very compelling need to waive that requirement, I see no need that's compelling to waive that requirement. And the Cape Arundel zone code should apply. And I thank you for letting me comment.
It's Mr. Slager's belief that the town of Kennebunkport made an error in not referring the application to the planning board. Under ordinance 10.2A3, construction and external enlargement of any structure go to the planning board, as well as a shoreland zone review. If this is the case and the permit is not valid, then under the law of Maine, the 30-day waiver appeal period is not relevant. Justice Alexander, in the case of Brackett versus the town of Rangeley, said in a dissenting opinion, there is no good cause waiver to challenge an invalid permit. On the other hand, if the town does not accept that position, the records of the town indicate that the town did not submit a list of building permits issued bi-monthly as required by the town ordinance. There's no record of the town sending a list of building permits to the York County Star, and there's no record in the Coast Star that any list was published. The first notice that Mr. Slager got of the building permit was on April 1, 2019, when he found a letter that was left in his backyard when he returned from Florida. From that point on, as soon as that occurred, Mr. Slager took the proper efforts to get to the point where he could file an appeal. Unfortunately, he immediately went to an attorney, and I have a timeline here that I'd be happy to pass out to members of the board if you'd like. I think this agenda will show there was ample good cause for the delay. The first notice was on April 17, 2019. The day later, he went to his first attorney. That attorney took until April 28th to tell him he wouldn't take the case. He went to a second attorney on May 29th, 2019. That lawyer did nothing, and on June 25th, 2019, returned the file that Randy had left with him unopened. On November 29th, 2010, he had rotator cuff surgery, and the surgery and the recuperative period of time ran till May 20, 2019. On January 30, 2019, he went back to Florida for further treatment on his back, and that lasted until June 7, 2019. On May 23, 2019, there was death in the family. He had to attend the memorial service. On June 9, 2019, he had meningitis, was hospitalized, and the treatment extended to June 16, 2019. From June 17, 2019 to July 7, 2019, he had post-operative treatment. On July 12, 2019, he hired my law firm, and we filed an appeal on August 1, 2019. A multitude of things has occurred. His delay in filing within 30 days was beyond his control. I think he exercised every single effort he possibly could to earn the right to get a waiver. The board has that authority, and we request that the board grant him the 30-day waiver the 30-day appeal period, and allow this case to go forward. And I think that pretty much sums up our reason for that. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you. And thank you for sticking to the timeliness issue as you did.
Thank you.
Introduce yourself, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is, excuse me, my name is Dan Rosenthal, and I am an attorney with the firm of Marcus Clegg in Portland, and it's my privilege to represent Lori Bell, who's here with me. The gentleman to my right is Trey Milam, who has just had the fortune or misfortune of finding out that he passed the main bar exam a couple of days ago. I guess I'm going to stay neutral on whether that's good news or not. And I want to say that Lori Bell is not going to address you directly. She does not like conflict. She does not like being in conflict with her neighbor. She doesn't want to be here, and she shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be here. Lori is a native of Maine who has been fortunate enough to be able to purchase an extraordinary piece of property at 200 Ocean Ave. It is a gem of a spot, and she has devoted herself in terms of her time and her resources to making that property shine. She's proud of it. She loves it. She wants the town to be proud of it. She wants people who take a walk on Ocean Avenue to see something beautiful, and she's put a lot of her resources into doing that, and she's been doing that since this permit was issued, which happened in December. Almost a year ago, this permit was issued. And here we are on September 24th, about 10 months later. And as I said, we shouldn't be here. Section 9.3 does apply. It has a very clear 30-day requirement. There's no dispute it was missed. It's not even close. Mr. Atkins just told you that the first notice that his client received was on April 17th, 2019, which is flatly contradicted by the record and by the evidence that's in the record. And we've submitted a couple of letters. I'm not going to read them out loud. I know you all can read them and see what they say. I do want to walk through the law a little bit and the time chronology because I think it's inescapable that beyond the fact, and it is a fact that the 30-day requirement wasn't met, the good cause standard is simply not met here. And it's not a close call, to be candid. So the Maine Supreme Court has talked a little bit about what good cause can consist of. And in the Tebow versus Town of Newfield case, a former York County Judge, Justice Brennan, noted, and he quoted from a Maine Supreme Court case, and he said, the law court maintains the following rule. Law court is what we call the Maine Supreme Court. Strict compliance with the appeal procedure of an ordinance is necessary to ensure that once an individual obtains a building permit, he can rely on that permit with confidence that it will not be revoked after he has commenced construction. And the court has recognized the importance of these deadlines for people who are investing substantial sums of money to be able to have some certainty. And I would point you to the same Brackett versus Town of Rangeley case that Mr. Atkins cited, except I would point you to the majority opinion, not the dissent. Dissent is when a judge votes in the minority and writes a separate opinion and says, well, I think the majority got it wrong. Mr. Atkins talked to you about the dissent. I'll point you to the majority, where the court talks about how important it is to make sure that when people do what they're supposed to do, like Ms. Bell did, and come to the town and ask for a permit and build in accordance with the permit and work with the town code staff and cooperate and act in good faith, that those people need to know that there's going to be a point where someone isn't going to come knocking 60 days, 90 days, 180 days, 270 days later and say, oh, I don't think you should have had that permit. It's really important that people be able to make investments. And that is why, when you read the cases that the Maine Supreme Court has addressed on this, and we talk about them in our letters, what you're going to see is that notice of issuance of the permit and the amount of time that passes after someone gets notice before they file an appeal are the factors, the biggest factors that the Maine Supreme Court is worried about. And here, the facts of this case are really extraordinary in terms of the notice that Mr. Slager had. In July of 2018, Lori Bell emailed Mr. Slager, and she told him, she said, "I'm going to redo the entire landscape, and we'll be asking for permits from the town." In October, another email, she refers to, quote, "major renovations, building all new stone walls, expanding the lawn, taking out trees." And Mr. Slager responds, he says that he's excited, and that he'll be at the property for a week in December. And in December, the permit's issued, the notices are provided. 10 days later, Mr. Slager says, "This is great," uses the phrase "huge project." In January of 2019, Mr. Slager was at his property, and in your books or somewhere, there's a letter that I submitted in August that had a series of exhibits, some photographs, and one of them is labeled as Exhibit F. And it shows you some pretty unmistakable construction happening right on the property line. And there's an excavator, and there's all kinds of stuff dug up, and you can see Mr. Slager's house, and you can see Ms. Bell's house. That is what he would have seen when he was at his property in January of 2019. There's no missing it. And he said, and I'm going to quote, in an email to Ms. Bell that day, he said, quote, "The workers are busy, and even in rough condition, I can start to see the front yard take shape." At that point in time, he's seeing the work, he's commenting on the work, he's been aware of the work, he says he's excited about it. There's no question that he knew what was happening. And I want to just take a minute and talk about something that isn't addressed in my letters to you, and that is that in his appeal, Mr. Slager says that he couldn't have found the notice that Lori Bell's architect left at his house of issuance of the permit, because it was buried in a snowbank, and he didn't find it until the spring. And in fact, in his appeal, he goes as far as to tell you that this was somehow intentionally calculated not to be found, and it was, being hidden somehow. We've gone back, and we've actually looked at what the weather was doing in December of 2018 and January 19. And if I may, Amy, I'm not sure the right procedure to try to, I'd like to provide a couple of exhibits to the
You
board.
could ask the chair if that's permissible.
We can, due to our 7-day
Okay.
in advance, but we can, as a board, vote whether to accept or not.
Okay,
If you would like us to
I
discuss it, and
I would. I think it might be useful because I will represent to you that I've got some interesting information about what the weather was doing at that time. And I've also got a photograph that I'd like to give you as well that will show you a little bit about what the weather was doing in January 2019.
so the board feels, because we can accept and choose whether to use it or not,
We need a motion.
we would,
Okay.
yes.
I make a motion to review the additional data provided by the attorney.
Okay,
I'll second. I see no
Okay.
problem. Yep.
all in favor? Okay,
I'm just gonna,
A lot of paper. A lot of paper. Thank you. But I think this, the weather.
thank you.
You're talking about the weather.
So I don't think we necessarily, I'm not going to ask you to flip through and study the weather, but I'm going to tell you that when you look at what was happening in December of 2018, it was unusually warm. There was very little precipitation. And that continued into January. There was a little bit of precipitation early on in the month of January. And what you're going to see is that it also, while the temperature had some dips, it warmed up, and that snow that did fall would have melted. So, for example, in January, we're talking now about the kind of 12th to the 19th time frame. A little bit of snow had fallen on the 8th. On the 10th, it warmed up to 33. On the 14th, it warmed up to 33. On the 15th, it warmed up to 35. On the 16th, it warmed up to 37. On the 18th, it warmed up to 34. I'll let you draw your own conclusions, but our position is that there really wouldn't have been any snow on the ground. And the photo that I've handed you confirms it. This is a photo. It is in the record, but what's actually in the record is my client emailed this photo to Mr. Slager on January either 18th or 19th. I'm giving it to you as her contractor emailed it to her, and the reason I'm doing that is because it'll show you that it was taken on that day. It's not an old photograph. I didn't want you to think that I'm coming in here with a photo from September and try to pretend that it's January. This is from January of 2019. There's no snowbank. There's no snowbank hiding notice that my client's landscape architect left at Mr. Slager's house. And look, I've just spent 5 of your minutes talking about weather and snowbanks. And the last thing we want to do is waste your time, but we think this is important because we're all here on something that notice was provided a long time ago and in multiple ways, and yet there are allegations being made that there wasn't notice, and there are allegations being made that it was hidden on purpose, and we think it's important to set the record straight here and let you know what the efforts were that Lori Bell made to make sure that Mr. Slager knew what was going on, and he did know what was going on.
Can I ask you a question? I know I have it in here, but when was the notification delivered to the abutters? Can you remind me what that date was?
Mr. Tompkins, who was Ms. Bell's landscape architect, told her on the day the permit was issued that notices had been delivered. So I haven't talked to Mr. Tompkins, but I believe it was right then on December 4th.
The email does say December 4th.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Slager says his first notice was April 17th, 2019. Respectfully, we don't think that's right, even if it were right. 30 days from April 17th, 2019 is May 17th. 60 is June 17th. 90 is July 17th. Again, we're not even close to being within a 30-day limit. There is an item in your file that I think is pretty interesting too, and I'm not gonna hand it out to you again. I'm not gonna waste paper, but I'm gonna just hold it up in the air, and I'm gonna tell you that this is what it looks like. Okay, and what you're gonna see here is this is provided by the code office, and on May 20th, it says Randy Slager stopped in. Lists his address, lists his phone number, and it says, please let him know if plans change for 200 Ocean. Please let him know if plans change. What conversation is he having in the code office where it doesn't come up that there's been a permit issue for this property? And what plans is he talking about, if not the plans for this property? He doesn't want to know, according to this note, whether there are plans. He wants to know if they're going to change. How can they change if they haven't been filed? And how is it possible that there's a conversation in the code office that doesn't point out the fact that there's a permit? And that's on May 20th. And again, 30 days from May 20th takes you to June, 30 more, to July, 30 more, I think it's like 70 days from that point to August 1st. Now, nothing gets done until August 1st. And so let's just talk about what the law does, how it applies to this case. I'm going to talk about a couple of Maine Supreme Court cases. They're in our letter. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about them. In the Viles case that we cited, the court talked about applying a good cause exception only where there are, quote, special circumstances which would result in a flagrant miscarriage of justice if the appeal weren't permitted to proceed. Now, in that case, there was no appeal deadline. The abutter didn't have notice, and the abutter took immediate action when they got notice, immediate action. And not one of those things are true here. There is an appeal deadline in the ordinance. The abutter did have notice. The abutter did not take immediate action. In the Wilgram case, the court found no good cause for appeal 7 months after a permit was issued, where the abutter waited 76 days after she knew the construction was underway. And that's a case where our highest court in our state is specifically rejecting the approach that Mr. Slager is taking here. And it found that because the appeal was untimely, the merits of the appeal actually couldn't be reached because it was untimely. And it was improper to address them. We have a delay of at least 7 months here. The same analysis really ought to apply. In the Brackett case, the town violated its own ordinance requiring notice, which isn't the case here. And the abutter, even in that case, appealed within 30 days. So these cases make it really clear that the existence or absence of notice and the amount of time that the abutter waited after getting notice are the primary factors. And there is no case that we're aware of, and Mr. Atkins hasn't cited one, in which an abutter who waited after the applicable deadline from actually receiving notice, so in other words, took the deadline and ran it not from when the permit was issued, but from when they got notice. There's no case where that person has been able to demonstrate good cause. And so you can run 30 days from just about any date we have here and not get to August 1st. Now, Mr. Slager has talked about going to see counsel, and the first lawyer he talked to, I noticed that there's a month between April 28th and May 29th. I'm not sure what happened there. Then there's a period where he's talking to another lawyer. And then there are a number of other things that he lists. He did have time on May 20th to come down to the code office and ask about whether the plans were going to change. And ultimately, the signature on his appeal is his. Mr. Slager signed the appeal, not Mr. Atkins. Mr. Atkins may have helped him with it, but there's no reason why he could not have filed an appeal with the town within 30 days of even April 17th. There's just no reason that rises to the level of good cause. So the last thing I guess I want to say, I think, goes to this issue that our Maine Supreme Court talks about, which is people needing to be able to rely on permits. Lori Bell did what the ordinance told her to do. It told her to come ask for a permit. It told her to supply plans. That's what she did. She ought to be able to act in accordance with her permit and to know and to have some confidence that on a permit that was issued on December 4th, she's not going to be finding out on September 24th that permit is in jeopardy. And if people can't do that, that's a real problem. That's a real practical problem. And I hope and trust that this board will take that into account in considering this matter. And I thank you all for your patience and for your attention.
Thank you. Questions to begin with?
May I respond?
Would, perhaps if April asks her question, it might pertain to what you're going to respond to. If it doesn't, then let's.
Sure.
Well, first of all, As of August 1st, when the appeal was applied for, how much money had Mrs. Bell invested already in that project?
You can't tell my husband.
Well, I mean, we have how much the total project
It's-
cost on the building permit.
We're close to $1 million, and I hope he's not watching. We're close to $1 million on this project.
As of August 1st, that's how much
Yeah.
you had invested already?
We're getting pretty close, yeah.
Even though the financial investment has nothing to do with our decision.
Well, I
But I
mean,
think it
that's
speaks
one
to
of the
the point.
points that he made, was that the reason the courts,
But that has nothing to do with the timeliness, right?
well, I think it does.
Yes, it does, if it's this direct point. How long is too long?
Well, I don't think we need to know the dollar amount, just that
Right.
time, money, and effort
Well-
has been spent to,
Right, I mean,
Do-
she has a substantial investment.
It's April's question.
As
We
of-
can discuss it.
Yeah.
after.
My other question is, can I ask Warner a question?
Are we ready prior to a statement? Would you like to hear a statement, or would you like?
Is he
to
gonna,
just
are you gonna
ask
make a
question?
statement, Warner?
Only if necessary.
Only if necessary and directed.
So go ahead and ask it, let's see where it goes.
Okay, so Mr. Slager's attorney suggested that this should have gone to the planning board, but you didn't send it to the planning board, so I want to know what that reason is.
Sure. So, just for the record, my name's Warner Gilliam. I'm the town's Director of Planning and Development. Also, within that role, I'm also the Code Enforcement Officer as well. So, April's question is, your question is a good one. As far as, there's been a question asked, said, well, why didn't this go to the planning board? And so, what I'll cite to you is, there's that Article 10.2A2, which Mr. Slager appeals cites. It says construction, alteration, or external enlargement of any building or structure. So that's kind of the, I would say the broad language. It said this is what goes to the planning board. However, what's not considered is the additional language within the same article, where it specifically says, except as provided in subparagraph B, site plan review and approval by the planning board shall be required for. So then the question is, so what's the specific exemption that applies there? And in this case, exception B1 clearly states, site plan review and approval shall not be required for detached single-family dwellings, accessory apartments, two-family dwellings, home occupations, and their accessory buildings, driveways, and parking areas. So it's been the long-standing interpretation of the Code Enforcement Office that this property is a single-family home. The structures and the improvements on the property are accessory related to that use as a single-family home. The other particular article that's addressed in Mr. Slager's appeal cites Article 11.4E, which gives, in our interpretation, gives the Code Enforcement Office discretion as to whether or not to send a particular application to the planning board. So this has been in the ordinance for a long time. I look back through, and it's been in town's land use ordinance since 1985. So it's it's clear administrative language. But I believe this language was put in place for specific and unique circumstances. Circumstances in which, under the discretion of the code office, proposed permit or use is such that the code officer does not feel as if they have the authority to render a decision. So in other words, if I've determined that something is outside of the scope of my jurisdiction, then there's discretion that says, as a code officer, I can say, all right, I don't feel that this is within my jurisdiction. I have a mechanism in which to address this, and that mechanism is stated that I can send that to the planning board. But I believe that's a general provision that gives me this administrative path for these unique requests that fall outside of what may or may not be anticipated within the land use ordinance. But I believe the ordinance is pretty clear. There's a specific exemption that states that site plan approval for single-family homes and the associated uses does not require site plan approval by the planning board.
Need to follow up, April? or
I have one other question for Werner. Just want you to get a little exercise.
Sure.
So just to be perfectly clear, there is no requirement in the land use ordinance that anybody needs to get notified, and a butter does not need to get notified when a basic building permit is issued, correct?
So our notice requirements are specific within the ordinance. The notice requirements specifically apply to planning board site plan review projects, zoning board of appeals scenarios, blasting permits, require notification. In the case of blasting, we don't do the notification, but we verify that it's been done. But those are the cases in our ordinance that require us to do notice to the abutters.
Other than that, nobody needs to get notified.
That's correct. And I will address, the question was brought up as far as notice to the newspaper and how, that it's alleged that there is no proof. So it's been a longstanding practice of the Code Enforcement Office that, we keep track of all our permits that we issue. Those are put into an Excel spreadsheet. It's common practice that those are distributed amongst the Board of Selectmen. They go to different departments. They are posted in the town hall, and they are sent to the York County Coast Star. We don't send them certified, but they're put in an envelope and they are mailed to the Coast Star. I don't have a certified mailing proof, but that's been a long-standing practice of the town of Kennebunkport.
And I do know that is true.
I was going to say, I can vote for that
I
too.
can vouch for it. I used to do it.
Hey, one other small point. I'm looking at ordinance 11.11, which is publication of building permits. And the last line of that says, "The failure of the code enforcement officer to make available this list or the decision of the newspaper not to publish this list shall not invalidate any building permit."
Right.
So it is addressed in the code. 11.11.
Oops. Mr. Atkins, I cut you off.
Yeah, 2 points. I believe shoreland zone review requires this application be sent to the planning board under the provisions of 10.3. The events that took place prior to April 17th, Mr. Slager was led to believe that the only thing being done was landscaping. He was not told there was major construction going on. There were no plans of record at the town hall. Even up till today, the plans are not complete, and I believe the town is still seeking to obtain additional plans, engineering plans, from Ms. Bell to support what she's planning to do. The application, the building, she never did what the permit required to be done. There's nothing to see. There was no, the project that she plans to do was not visible. So there's no obligation, there's no requirement that he get notice for something that didn't exist. There aren't many law court decisions on this issue because the law court has said where a town has the ability to waive the 30-day notice, the law court pretty much leaves it to the town to make its own decisions in that regard. Excuse me, my voice is a little dry. But good cause means more than Ms. Bell's attorney said. Mr. Slager has a long history of medical treatment. It's debilitating. He lives in Florida. I mean, if a person with this kind of medical record doesn't generate the exception for the 30 days, I don't know what would. I guess those are my comments. Excuse me. Yeah? What?
I'd like to speak to this.
David Douglas is our engineer, and he'd like to make a comment about good cause, if he may. David?
Thank you,
Doug?
Mr. Chairman.
And-
Sir.
And would you introduce yourself?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sitting board. My name is David Douglas. I'm a licensed architect in the state of Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts. I'm NCARB certified, and I believe I may be the only licensed design professional in the room. And the reason I asked Alan to let me speak is no one has touched upon the most important reason for good cause here. And it's the basis for why we license design professionals. It's the basis for why we have a code office. And that is health, safety, and welfare of occupants of homes, occupants of patios, residents of the town, and neighbors. That alone, the safety issue in this alone, is all you need for good cause. If you turn away this based on not enough good cause, you will rob the town of the ability to hear what is really at stake here. So I would encourage you to not allow that to happen, regardless of how well-spoken the legalese was by Mrs. Bell's attorney. Thank you.
May I respond?
Sure.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you were pausing.
I would like to ask, before you do,
Of
I'd like
course.
to ask Mr. Atkins. We're drifting slightly out of the timeliness, but do you believe that the code office has been working to make corrections to any actions that were not part of the permit?
I believe the code office has gone out of its way to accommodate Ms. Bell in giving her leniency in establishing requirements and deadlines which haven't been met, and they keep on getting extended. I believe they've been extended about 4 times. The most recent one occurred about a week ago when she didn't meet a deadline established by the code officer to submit supporting engineering documentation, and apparently Walt Stinson's company, Sebago Technics, has now been hired to provide that information, which suggests to me that the work that was originally permitted hasn't been done. The town is not satisfied that it's been done, that because of that, Mr. Slager he cannot tell what's being done. He hasn't got the required notice, actual notice of what's going on next door. And there's a certain fairness and justice that I think this panel has to apply. But for a lot of these things, yes, the amount of time passed was longer than is customary, but the law doesn't have a limit. The law gives you the opportunity to establish what you believe to be a fair amount of time. Yes, it's more than 30 days. No one's saying it isn't. But there's enough facts before you for you to say he should get an exception, he should get a waiver of the 30-day period. Nothing's lost by giving him that. She hasn't completed her work. The engineering's not done. The town isn't satisfied. So despite the fact she may have put a lot of time and effort into it, nothing is lost if Mr. Slager's appeal is allowed to go through. The town benefits from it. There are safety issues. Some of the stones that have been put into this wall apparently have come loose and jeopardize people passing on Ocean Avenue. There's a lot to be gained by allowing the appeal to go forward. Everyone will benefit from it. And in the end, if it works right, Ms. Bell will have the proper wall or patio she's looking for. But to leave it unanswered, it does no one any good and doesn't serve the town's best interests.
you very much. Let me just address the points that were just raised, and I'm going to try to do them in roughly the order in which they were raised. Mr. Atkins told you that shoreland zone review, something about a shoreland zone, it's got to go to the planning board. And I would refer you to the section that he cited in, I think it was Article 11. And what it says is that the uses that are listed in Article 5 have to go to the planning board. And when you look at Article 5, it's talking about beaches and campgrounds and, various uses that aren't landscaping on a single-family dwelling. So I think that that's a really kind of a red herring.
It's ordinance 10.3.
Thank you very much. If I have any other legal questions I need help on, the permit, there's a suggestion that's come up it comes up in the written appeal, and it came up again just now, that, the permit application really didn't give notice of what was going to be done. I would refer you to the permit application that's in your file, and it's quite detailed under statement of work. There's a lengthy narrative in very small font, and plans attached. I mean, I don't know, I don't think you can miss what was going to be happening. In addition to which, Mr. Slager was on his property in January and could see with his eyes what was happening and could know this is a big project here. So there's nothing misleading here. There's nothing that wasn't there to be seen by anyone who would see. I respect Mr. Slager's service to his country, and I would never wish his medical problems on anyone. But he was in the code office on May 20th. He was on his property on January 17th, emailing about his generator. He was capable of sending emails to Ms. Bell. He was engaged. He knew what was happening. And again, medical problems are not anything that I would ever make light of, but they did not prevent him from taking action if he had wished to take action. And he didn't do that until very, very late in the game. Mr. Atkins says that nothing is lost if this permit is revoked or if you proceed. Well, respectfully, what's lost is the ability of applicants to have some certainty and to have some sense that if they start working and they start doing what they've asked the town to do and what the town has told them that they can do, that they're going to be able to continue to proceed and go forward as they've done, playing by the rules. Mr. Douglas told you that you won't be able to know that safety can be guaranteed and that safety can be protected. Respectfully, there is a code enforcement office. The representatives are in the room. They're more than capable of enforcing any violation of any permit. They have the power to do that. They have the resources to do it. When they see an issue, they raise it. Ms. Bell has worked with them closely, has been cooperative, has acted in good faith, has spent more money on engineering to provide information that wasn't requested when she first applied for the permit. She's provided it now. She's doing what you're supposed to do. They're doing what they're supposed to do. Revoking this permit or hearing an appeal filed in August of a permit issued in December does not prevent this town from being able to be confident that safety can be provided. And I guess the last thing I'll say is just to reiterate that there is probably not a case where someone misses a deadline that they couldn't come up with a reason why they missed the deadline. The fact that they can come up with something doesn't make that good cause, and the board is not obligated to set that deadline aside and to allow an appeal that is later than anything I've seen in the cases that have gone to the Maine Supreme Court. Again, that court talks about notice. We check that box. It talks about timeliness of action after the notice. We definitely cannot check that box here, so thank you.
one more final thought.
Sure.
The town has decided that the permit should be suspended. The town has made the decision that what Ms. Bell has done is not sufficient, it doesn't meet the requirements of the code office, and that speaks volumes. And if we're talking about trying to do fair justice here, I think that says it all. And I think the town should grant the waiver and move forward with hearing the appeal.
And if I could speak on the shoreland review requiring planning board approval, the 10.3 talks about shoreland review being required for uses as laid out in Article 5. Article 5 has no uses that require planning board approval. I've looked a number of times. However, I want to point you to Article 4.14B, which reads that activities and land uses requiring approval from the planning board issued in accordance with the provisions of in Article 10. This is uses permitted in the shoreland zone. Number 4 is public and private recreational areas involving minimal structural development. If you look at Exhibit C from the appeal, you'll see Ms. Bell's patio. I think that squarely fits within this use that's laid out here and requires planning board approval. I think 10.3 is a typographical error. I think it should read uses in Article 4, since Article 4 does contemplate uses permitted in the shoreland zone with planning board approval.
Werner, have you had time to, or would you like more time to think about that one?
So I'll go to Article 4.14 under uses permitted shoreland zone. And what I'll refer to is in A, activities and land uses requiring a permit from the code enforcement officer issued in accordance with the provisions in Article 1. And I'll point to number 4 and to number 5. Number 4 is single and two-family dwellings, including driveways, and 5 is structures accessory to allowed uses. So it's the long-standing interpretation of the code office that when we refer to single and two-family dwellings, that includes accessory elements of the property. And number 5, I think, supports that piece of it. Structures accessory to allowed uses, single-family residence are an allowed use in the shoreland zone. And again, this falls squarely under 4.14A, activities and land uses requiring a permit from the code enforcement officer.
Can I ask a question?
To Werner or
To Werner. And maybe it's just clarification. In the original building permit, it states that it's repairing and replacing existing walls. So it's not as though it was new construction that was not there to begin with. It was already stone walls and some landscaping that was there, and they were going to replace existing. Isn't that a differential if it needs to go to a planning board for shoreline? Because if it wasn't there to begin with, then it would be new. But if you're maintaining an existing?
So, in this particular case, again, our interpretation is that these are, while this is, the walls are considered structures, they are accessory to the single-family, to single-family home use, and so that those were all, were shown on the plans as, as applicable, and so that those fall under the guise of the permit and its attachments.
Okay.
May I make a final?
Doesn't have to be final.
Yeah, we're here all night. I get Reese's cups.
As soon as I said the word final, I thought, I wish I hadn't said final. I just want to say, we are now talking about the merits, and I don't think that was the intent of the board. But I think it's a kind of an important point here, because if the argument is good cause to waive the deadline is the supposed fact, and believe me, we have plenty to say about the merits, but if good cause to miss the deadline is the supposed fact that there's a violation, then there's no longer a 30-day requirement, because every person who misses the deadline is going to come to you and say, we have good cause because they violated the ordinance and the permit shouldn't have issued, and now there's no more 30-day requirement. So that logic really has to fall down. So I wanted to make that point.
I have a question for both tables, referring to emails, which we have multiple examples of, well documented for a timeline. Each opinions on our email correspondence notification.
Absolutely. And we talk about this in our letters, there's a concept of actual knowledge, actual notice, constructive notice. So the ordinance, the notice that the ordinance talks about was provided. There is well recognized in the law the concept that if you have actual notice of something, so a formal notice requirement wasn't met, but you knew that something was happening, or you had facts that put a reasonable person on inquiry that they ought to go find out more, that would be recognized as being satisfactory. And so that's why we, in addition to the fact that the landscape architect delivered the notice, and in addition to all these other facts, we're talking about these emails to make it clear that in addition to all that stuff, Mr. Slager knew what was happening and had every reason to inquire, and was every reason to do something like go down to the code office, which he did.
Mr. Atkins?
Fulton, you want
Yeah, the emails that Mr. Slager sent, I think the one in January specifically, at that point in time, he saw footers being placed into the ground for the wall that was built and is now the wall A11 on the site plan that abuts his property. That's one of the walls of the raised patio. In Miss Bell's application, she said she was replacing existing walls. However, she did not mention that she was building the patio, or a fire pit area as it's referred to on the site plan. The fire pit area was not there before. It was new construction, and there is a photograph in Mr. Slager's appeal that shows what had been there before. It's Exhibit D to Mr. Slager's appeal, and there is clearly no patio there. So that was new construction. Her permit application, had Mr. Slager looked at it, would not have put him on notice that she was building a patio next to his property anyway, because it only contemplated replacing landscaping, replacing existing walls. And that all the correspondence Mr. Slager had with Miss Bell was on the same line of thinking. She had mentioned that she's replacing the landscaping, she's replacing walls, she's clearing brush and dead trees and planting flowers. And that is why you get the tone you do from Mr. Slager in his emails, because he was excited about making the property look nice. However, she never said that she was building a patio on his property line. And so I think that's where he would not have received notice of what she was doing had he looked at the building permit. It was what she built ended up violating the permit. It's by not being set back 4 to 6 feet as it's shown on her plan.
But in the matter of timeliness, a discussion through email of activity on her property seems to be noticed.
And he had Mr. Slager had no objection to the landscaping and the replacing of old walls, the replacing of dead trees and the planting of new flowers. So he saw no reason to inquire further. Those were all things that, as you can see, he was looking forward to on her property.
Before we have more questions, this is a public hearing, and there is some public in the audience. And I do know that the code office sent out notices to 200 feet, I believe, or with the stop work order. Was there anyone here, the neighbors, that would like to say something? Seeing none, we can close that portion and continue on. Kevin, questions?
No, I don't think I have any questions. The one comment I would make is, you referred to the permit and what was called out in the permit. So I just went through and I reread it. And so I guess I do have a question about this. Because you talked about it, didn't talk about the fire pit and the patio. I'm reading it and I see it says an existing patio in disrepair will be replaced with salvage pavers and fire pit. And an existing poolside patio in disrepair will be replaced. So is there a different patio that was constructed that wasn't referenced in this document?
There's a poolside patio on the other side of Miss Bell's property.
It refers to two patios here and a fire pit.
Picture.
Yeah,
Is the one that showed what she had.
that's right. The Exhibit D shows the property line between Miss Bell's and Mr. Slager's
Yep.
property. And there's no visible patio in that picture, so.
The generator is on the end of, on the side of my property.
Kevin, if we can stay on the timing of this issue,
Okay, yeah.
is it,
Well, it only went to the, he brought it up relative to the timeliness and said even if they had looked at the permit, he wouldn't have recognized that was kind of what was going on. So that's the reason I bring it up. So relative to the timeliness portion of it. So,
more questions?
nope, I think you answered.
April?
I'm good
Really?
at the moment.
I don't have any other questions right now.
I don't think I have any directly. They addressed the emails. And you check.
Does code enforcement want to say anything?
Okay, that's where I was gonna go next. Werner, would you like to present any more?
So I'll speak a little bit about Mr. Slager's concerns, because I think it's important background information. We've talked a little bit about it, and so I'll speak a little bit to that also, just in terms of kind of process. So while it's not the subject of this appeal specifically, I think it's important to talk a little bit about, we've kind of alluded to the corrective action and, the letter that was sent to Ms. Bell. As has been noted, and you certainly have evidence of it, staff conducted site visits in response to Mr. Slager's concerns. Specifically, we were looking for the specifics that work at 200 Ocean Avenue was different than what was permitted. And there were certainly Mr. Slager's questions and concerns about structural integrity of the built retaining wall. So in response to that, staff performed site inspections looking specific to those concerns, observed what was on site, compared it to the documents that we had filed for the permit, and we responded to Ms. Bell. What we found were structural detail differences in wall construction, crushed gravel, dimensional differences in retaining walls and stairs. Concerned about the changes in this project, we requested additional documentation for specific areas. And so while it's true deadlines haven't always been met that we put in the letter, Lori Bell and her contractor have been working with the code office in providing the requested documentation. So what we received is an updated survey plan put together by Livingston and Hughes regarding current project status. So in its current state, project remains under documented pre-construction lot coverage We also received a letter from Matthew Miller, who's a licensed structural engineer, regarding observations of the wall on site. In the midst of this process, we know that structural elements had changed from what had originally been submitted, and we asked for, as we had in the original permit, that a PE weigh in on the design, the designs of these walls. Neither myself nor any of my staff are PEs, but we do have a good number of years of experience in building inspections and on-site work. We've been in the field for a while, collectively, and so also important to note that as a staff group, all three of us, myself, Greg Reed, Matt Philbrick, have all been on site, and we've had extensive discussions regarding, the questions and concerns of what we saw. So we required that a PE look at not the rubble walls, but also this particular block wall in question. And what we heard back is that there were, we received documentation from Matthew Miller regarding the rubble walls. But what we did find in his letter, that his observations regarding the block wall were lacking. He made some statements in there that, I'm going to paraphrase what it said, was that he observed the wall and didn't see any obvious issues. So we went back to Ms. Bell and essentially said, well, that information doesn't satisfy us in terms of what we're looking for. So we expected, that sufficient structural reporting was going to be provided for all aspects of this retaining wall. So I understand the concerns. We've looked at the wall. Had we believed that there was an immediate health, life, safety issue, our actions would have reflected that. So as we reached out to Ms. Bell and her contractor and looking for more information, they responded back with correspondence that they had engaged another structural engineer to review the wall as well. And so I can tell you that we received that report today. I've not had the opportunity to review that report, but we were notified that Ms. Bell and her contractor had engaged Sebago Technics to do a review of that wall. So again, I've not had a chance to review specifically all of the details of that letter. But suffice to say that, that we take Mr. Slager's concerns seriously regarding structural integrity, and I believe we've taken the appropriate measures in securing information to make sure that what is on Ms. Bell's property is structurally sound.
Can I ask Werner another question? Not getting off that easy. My question is, what was the very first day, if you can remember the date, that Mr. Slager came into your office with concerns?
Oh, gosh.
Was it before that note that we have on the 20th of May?
Let me look back at my notes here.
Look in May.
Yeah, you're right. So here I have my notes here. Mr. Slager came into the office May 20th, find out if there were any new plans for 200 Ocean Avenue. He asked us to let him know if the plans had changed. And then I have noted here at various times, Mr. Slager came into the office to see if there were new plans for Ocean Ave. He reviewed the file and said he'd be back in touch.
So May 20th was the first time?
You have 20th and not the 23rd?
I have 520 written down
Okay.
on my notes, but
Okay.
it's, whatever the sheet, that has all
So
the notes and everything on it.
So So it's not probable that there were two, would have been the one time.
No.
Well, I have on here, just, it says that at various times,
Oh,
Mr.
at
Slager
various
came
times, okay.
came into the
Okay,
office to
all
see
right.
if there were new
Sorry.
plans. Yep. I believe he spoke primarily with Matt Philbrick in regards to that.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond to his presentation?
Seems like appropriate time since he was,
Well, is he gonna talk about
We
the
are-
merits or the 30-day
depends
rule?
on, again, what's,
It's about time. Thank you. So if we're gonna make this about time, I'm gonna go back to the day the permit was issued. I own a consulting firm, and I consult on mostly building envelope and related matters, forensics investigations, walls, masonry. But everything I consult on is pretty much the same process. I start with gathering information. So I met with Mr. Atkins, and he gave me a file, and it had these two drawings in it. This is some elevations and one small section detail of a structural retaining wall that retains public space that people reside on, and it's a plan. So I said to Mr. Slager's team, where is the permit set? And Mr. Slager and his team said, this is all we have. So I said, okay, when I leave here, I'm gonna go down and speak to the code office. And I mean, no disrespect to Matt, but when I spoke to him in the office and asked for a complete set, he said, this is all we have. And I said, no cover sheet, no code review, no existing conditions, no demolition plan. And I listed off a number of things. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was roughly something like that. And I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact conversation. I write it down. And I said, is this something you would normally issue a permit on? A $500,000 permit on a home, but it's pretty large. It's nearly commercial. I didn't say that at the time, but it is very much commercial in nature. Is this what you would, this is all you require? You don't have a construction set? And he kind of said, yeah, and I'm paraphrasing, we kind of, not really. That's not really what we would normally do. So if you want to talk about pertinence of time, this permit should have never been issued based on what was submitted. Thank you.
there's a word that continues to come up, the word concern. And everyone has used it. And it appears that the concerns of parties to the code enforcement officer and the office itself has been met. Now, I'm drifting off the timeliness too, but because we don't act on those errors or concerns. Ours is a timeliness issue here. So I want to, we've drifted off a bit, and unless I'm mistaken, it sounds as if people have been able to express their concerns. And I hope it's enough for this hearing where that's not our what?
Authority, jurisdiction.
Yes. So, are you sure, April, you don't have any more? Come on. Okay, all right. Anything final? Mr. Rosenthal?
Thank you very much. You've all been very patient. It's getting late. I'm not going to go on at length. Just to respond to the last thing that Mr. Douglas said, what Mr. Slager would have seen is the footings for a new wall being built on his property line. And if there were concerns. That's why you go and you find out what there is to find out. And if you aren't satisfied, you file an appeal. And he didn't. And so, again, I appreciate the board's attention to the bleeding over into the merits from the timeliness issue, but they really are two different issues. And I just urge you not to be distracted by the discussion that you've heard about the safety issues and all that. The code office is dealing with that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Atkins?
No, I want to thank you for your time and listening to us. I guess if I had to make one comment, it would be that what hasn't been mentioned is that the town has issued a stop work order, which is a pretty powerful thing to do. It says a lot about how the town views things going. It speaks to safety, it speaks to the permit. I'm not saying that justifies the amount of time Mr. Slager has taken to file the appeal, but I think it's very relevant and you should take it into consideration in your deliberations. And thank you very much, I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Anything else, Werner? Okay. Werner shook his head for the record.
Shook his head to a negative, yeah. Side to side.
And before I close it, I referenced in here. That's the
Okay.
last submission.
Submission.
12. Yep, I cover that for you?
Yep.
Okay, all right. So if there are no more questions during the public hearing part,
At least this part of it.
at least this part, that's right. Yeah. If there are no more questions for anyone out here from this board, then we could close that portion. Are we agreed? Kevin, you agree?
I'm agreed.
Okay,
Unless you need a motion.
all right. Who'd like to start?
So you're beginning deliberations on the timeliness or the
Yes.
question of whether the board, upon a showing of good cause, determines to waive the 30-day requirement.
Yes.
Okay.
What she said.
Okay. Well, I mean, I
That's why
can,
we have
It's-
her.
I will,
Thanks, Amy.
yeah.
well, I can certainly start.
Go ahead, Kevin.
If you'd like.
I'm asking for someone to start before I do, or I would start, so go ahead.
Well, there's been a lot of information here. A couple hundred pages, I think, of information. But when I think of the timeliness piece, my view of this, and I took a lot of notes and I read all the documentation I had, it certainly appears to me that there was knowledge of the work that was being done all the way back in the January timeframe. And Mr. Slager was there in January, I believe. He saw the work that was going on. There was email documentation back and forth that pertained to it. And if you even forget about that, there was paperwork that was provided to Mr. Slager. And even if he didn't find it until April, he knew about it in the April timeframe, by the timeline that was presented by his attorney. And, you did talk about, some of the serious medical issues that you had in that time period. But even when you take those into account, I look at it, there were, some pretty substantial periods of time here where, it seems like an appeal could have been brought forward. And, I heard about the first lawyer and the second lawyer and the fact that they weren't very timely in getting back to you.
If it helps, I have medical documentation for that whole period, what I was being treated, that kept me from coming up here to follow up on it.
Yeah, no, and I think I think you went through that in pretty good detail, and I understand that, so thank you for that. But, I look at it, and I look at the, what was in the permit, and I think the what I see here for detail wouldn't make me feel like, there is good cause for going beyond the 30-day requirement. That's
Okay.
my view based on everything I've seen.
Okay.
Want to have my opinion?
Do you have one?
I do. I do. I feel that way back in October of 2018, even before the permit was issued, Mr. Slager knew that something was going to happen. The permit was applied for, and I agree that Mr. Slager didn't really, he knew what was going on, didn't really come to the code office until May, when he had concerns about what was going on. Not that he didn't know that this was happening, but he had concerns at that point. But that's not, I don't feel, good cause to nullify a permit that was issued months before that. It would be just like building a house. Someone gets a building permit for a house, and they start building it, and just because the neighbor doesn't like the style of the house, doesn't mean that they should go and get the permit revoked. It's not, something that should happen. Ms. Bell had substantial investment in that property at the point when Mr. Slager finally applied. And you don't need a lawyer to apply for an appeal. His signature is on the appeal, not an attorney. And appeals to these boards, you don't need an attorney to come and appeal to the ZBA. Anybody can come and speak or appeal a permit. So I don't feel that having to wait for the first attorney, the second attorney, and then the third attorney is good cause to delay the appeal. Unfortunately, your health was a problem, but again, Ms. Bell or anybody shouldn't be held up because one of their neighbors has, a health issue. She had to rely on, once that 30-day period was over, that whatever money she was investing into her project was in good faith with the town. So, I don't feel that there's good cause, and the 30-day period definitely should have applied.
Okay.
I think that's what we're all struggling with, is the 30-day time period. And hearing both cases, both sides, and having all your medical issues, unfortunately, that was unfortunate for your circumstance, but it appears that we have strong evidence that the 30-day appeal probably should have been filed in a more timely manner, that there was too much of a time gap between steady communication between the parties and inquiries and communication with the town, that 30-day time clock was already ticking. Other things that have happened and gone on that is not for our jurisdiction, that is not for us to weigh in on, that's something that the code office is continuing on. But I think right here, we have to look at, was the appeal filed in a timely manner? And I think everything that was presented to us, I would have to say it was not submitted to us in a timely manner. It did not meet the 30-day appeal period.
Okay.
Wayne?
The timeline that Mr. Atkins gave us begins, for the record, for those of you who are watching at home or not, it begins 4/17/19. And a great deal of documented, submitted material to us, and by the way, to both groups. It was very well put together so that we could follow it, because that's what we were after. And while I'm saying that out loud, thank you for Lisa for
Yes.
putting it all together the way that she did and held it together so that when you folks called, Lisa made this happen. So, thank you, Lisa.
That's the secretary of the office.
So the 4/17/19 of first notice, as Mr. Atkins has presented for Mr. Slager. And the reason I asked earlier about email notification, it appears that the very first that we were given was July 25 of 2018. On the recent timeline that we got tonight, it is April 17, 19. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 email back and forth correspondence between Mr. Slager and Ms. Bell prior to that all discuss activity on her property. It's hard to deny that. It's right there. In our electronic age, if you write it down in email, it shows up. And as April presented, a simple phone call to the code enforcement office gets a lot of answers. And it notifies the code office that perhaps there is something going on. So we have the permit being issued December 4th by the town, and then we have the snow envelope, if for a better phrase, that was left on December 4th. That according to the email that we have in our records, the landscape architect also left it at 2 other locations. Hand-delivered, left there. And to be fair, the architect left in that mentioned that there was no one at home. So I don't have any trouble stating that the 240 days as presented, or the 196 days, there are a number of different versions of how many days it is. That's an extended period of time. And I also, having been from here, grown up here, it is very likely that someone in Mr. Slager's property, when he's not there, someone is looking occasionally, checking the property.
We don't know that, but.
We don't know that, but that's why we're not going back and forth. But it is, there was activity, and those people who drove by when the project got bigger knew there was activity because of the wall, the stone wall. It was common knowledge that something was going on. So it just appears that there was a lot of time in that period, that it's not reasonable to assume that in my mind, that Mr. Slager did not know what was going on. More, Kevin?
Nope.
Amy, have we missed, do we need a recap? Are we doing all right?
Oh, you're doing great.
Okay, thanks for typing.
Amy?
Are we ready to vote?
I'd like to check with each person to make sure if someone wants.
I was asking Amy
Yeah.
if she thought we were ready to
Well,
vote.
if you want to question any of us, if we want to question each other, I know it's our opinion, but it sounds like there is no questions for anyone else. Okay.
No, no further questions from me.
All right. Then it is perhaps a time to entertain a motion.
So before you do that, there are a couple different ways to do this. The law governing boards of appeals says that if you vote tonight and make a decision, that a written decision stating your findings and conclusions needs to issue within 7 days. I know I've been taking notes, and so my goal is to capture the sense of the board. I think I have a pretty good sense of the board. But the question is whether you want to have me prepare a draft that you would come back and look at and make any changes to. This is not to reopen this part of the hearing, but to allow you to make sure I've captured your sentiments correctly, and then take a vote? Or would you prefer to vote tonight and hope that I can produce something within 7 days that actually captures your reasons for deciding the way you do?
Opinion?
I'm good with what you decide. I mean, you're an attorney, you're probably gonna write the findings of fact better than we could.
I think
test,
we have a great deal of information, but it is focused down to timeliness.
Yep, that's
And,
what we're deciding
and that's
on.
that's what we've been asked to address. And while there is a great deal of information that was presented, the narrower focus of the timeliness might make it very, much simpler to have a motion that can be voted on
Tonight?
tonight, and then to review,
the written finding.
Yeah.
to review Amy's findings.
Amy, do you think that seven-day time period's going to be an issue?
No, I don't think it is.
Okay.
I think you should do what you feel comfortable doing. I think I've captured the sense of the
And will you
board.
just send us a copy and we can review it?
Yes, if you were to make major substantive changes, then we would have.
To come back,
We might have
but
to
other
come
than
back,
that-
but if you don't think that it requires that, then it can serve as the final decision.
Okay, I'm good with that.
If it's your inclination to vote tonight, which is fine with me, can I clarify a couple things to make sure I have?
Yes.
And I understand, in terms of evidence, I understand timeliness is the issue, but you are relying for factual evidence on email documentation going back and forth in the timeframe, email documentation and actual visits to the property by Mr. Slager in January, with email documentation spanning this period of time from when the building permit was issued on December 4th, all the way forward. I also heard concerns that even though Mr. Slager went to visit the code office on May 20th, he obviously was lodging concerns before then. Even if May 20th was the date, the appeal was not filed until August 1st. And then even considering the substantial medical issues, I'm also hearing that, waiting for an attorney wasn't necessary, that these are not the kinds of sufficient reasons that would cause you to make a decision that would not allow Ms. Bell's permit to be relied upon. And because she relied upon it in good faith and made a substantial investment on the basis of a permit that was issued in December, that all of those factors factor into your determination that there's no good cause to waive the 30-day appeal period. do I have
I think
more or
that
less?
summarizes it.
You got it.
Okay, one thing I did want to make sure of is addressing the safety issue and the structural integrity issue, and I think, Karen, you spoke to it, but I want to frame it this way.
Yeah.
Is it the finding of the board that issues to do with structural integrity or safety of what has been going on, or stop work order kinds of issues, are not within the purview of this board, and rather should be reviewed by the Code Enforcement Office, and any issues with respect to those kinds of things should be going to the Code Office and not reviewed by you in the first instance.
Correct.
Is that
Agreed.
okay? And I would concur with that and just cite for the record 9.3A, which makes clear that the board's jurisdiction here is not to include a decision or failure to act, a decision by the Code Enforcement Officer related to an enforcement-related matter.
We have no
Yes.
jurisdiction over
Okay,
that.
so that will go into the final decision as well.
We heard a lot of information that we can't do anything with.
Okay, I'm good with that, if that seems to be the
Okay.
sense of the board. And I will get something out within 7 days for you to look at. Okay?
Okay.
So, a motion to deny Mr. Slager's appeal,
Administrative appeal.
for the 30-day waiver. Simple as that.
Is that in the
Would you
motion?
like more?
Yeah, I think we.
You want me to,
Can you say
you want me
that
to
again? What's the motion?
you want me to make a shot at a motion?
Yes.
Or did you want to?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I make a motion that we deny the appeal of the issuance of a building permit for 200 Ocean Avenue, tax map 7, Block 12, Lot 5 in the Cape Arundel zone.
I'm
Can I
not
make
sure
a,
we want to say that. right?
can I make a friendly amendment?
Yeah.
Sure can.
That you are, motion to deny the appeal of issuance of the building permit at 200 Ocean Avenue on the basis of timeliness, the appeal being filed well after the 30-day requirement in the zone, in the land use ordinance under 9.3A, and there being no sufficient showing of good cause to waive the 30-day provision.
Right. I second that.
I'll third it.
Yeah, no, that works. Do I need to?
Any more discussion? Hey?
No.
All in favor of the motion? It shows 4 hands up. Motion carries per our majority. Okay? Then we are,
Meeting adjourned.
unless there is more, no? Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, okay. Once again, we need the majority. And Dave, it's all yours.